Hey there, fellow truth seekers. Welcome back for another deep dive, and let me tell you, today's gonna be a wild ride.
Buckle up.
We're jumping headfirst into the philosophy of Bertrand Russell, specifically some excerpts from a study guide on his work, The Problems of Philosophy. And let me tell you, this stuff is seriously mind-bending.
It really gets you thinking, that's for sure.
We're talking about the nature of reality itself. How do you know what you really know? Ever looked at something like, say, a table and wondered if it's really even there?
The table, huh? Sounds deceptively simple, right?
Exactly. That's what Russell was all about, taking these everyday things and turning our assumptions upside down. We're going to be exploring the appearance versus reality dilemma, how our senses play tricks on us, even diving into these things called universals. Don't worry, we'll unpack all that good stuff as we go.
We're not aiming for a blow-by-blow summary of the entire book. We're pulling out the juiciest bits, the stuff that makes you question everything you thought was obvious.
Okay, so Russell kicks things off with a real head-scratcher. Can we ever be certain about anything in the external world? I mean, how do we know anything is really real?
Right, like you might be looking at a table, but how can you be sure it's actually a table and not just some elaborate illusion?
Or a dream. Maybe we're all just brains in vats, like in that movie The Matrix.
It's a question that's been bugging philosophers for centuries. That ordinary table you mentioned, it becomes a surprisingly complex philosophical problem.
Right. I mean, it's a table. We use it to eat, to work, to play games. Seems pretty straightforward.
Sure, on the surface. But think about how its appearance changes depending on your perspective. The angle, the lighting, even your mood can make it seem different.
Okay, so if I swear that table's bright red, and you see it as more of a deep maroon, who's right?
That's where Russell introduces this idea of sense data. It's basically all those immediate signals. Our senses are picking up color, shape, texture, the whole shebang. But he argues it's not the actual object itself, just the raw data our brains then have to work with.
So our senses are like those old school cameras, kind of blurry and pixelated, and our brains are stuck trying to develop the picture.
And sometimes those pictures come out a little off. You
Yeah.
know? That's where inference comes in. Russell's point is, we don't directly perceive the table. We infer its existence based on that sometimes wonky sense data.
Oh, okay, I kind of get it. We're like detectives at a crime scene trying to piece together what happened based on the evidence, except the evidence is our senses.
And just like a detective can misinterpret clues, we can misinterpret our sensory information too.
Which leads to a whole lot of philosophical headaches. And this is where Russell really digs in. He wasn't buying into this naive realism idea where we just see the world as it is, no questions asked.
Oh no, Russell knew better than that. He understood our senses could be tricked, influenced by all sorts of things, even plain wrong sometimes, which is a bit unsettling when you think about it.
Right. It's like realizing the floor might not be real and you could fall through at any moment.
And if we can't totally trust our senses, then what can we trust? That's the million-dollar question Russell wrestled with.
And that, my friends, is where things are about to get really interesting. But we're going to take a quick break to let all that sink in. When we come back, we'll explore how Russell tried to build a foundation for knowledge in a world where our senses can't always be trusted. Don't touch that dial. All right, so we're back, and we're ready to dive back into the mind of Bertrand Russell. Last time, we left off with this idea that our senses aren't always reliable. So how do we build a foundation for knowledge if we can't trust what we see, hear, touch, taste, smell?
Well, Russell breaks down knowledge into two main types: knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description.
Okay, those sound intriguing. Lay it on me. What's the difference?
So knowledge by acquaintance is that direct, first-hand experience, like the feeling of warm sunshine on your skin. You just know it's warm. You don't need anyone to explain it to you.
The good stuff, right? The stuff that's just pure, unfiltered experience.
Exactly. But then there's this whole other category of knowledge, which Russell called knowledge by description. And this is a huge chunk of what we deal with every day.
Okay, so give me an example. What counts as knowledge by description?
It's the stuff we know indirectly, based on descriptions, inferences, things we've learned from other people. Like, think about historical events. You were there to witness them firsthand, right?
No, definitely not. I get my history from books and documentaries and sometimes those questionable historical dramas.
Right. So your knowledge of those events is based on descriptions from other sources. You're relying on historians, eyewitness accounts, even archaeological evidence.
So it's like building a case, but instead of solving a crime, we're trying to piece together the past. And some of those pieces might be missing or damaged or even fake.
Exactly. which is why Russell was careful to point out that knowledge by description can be a bit trickier, a bit less certain than knowledge by acquaintance.
Makes sense. I mean, if I'm relying on someone else's word, I better make sure they're a reliable source, otherwise I'm just buying into their version of events, which might be totally skewed.
And that's a big part of what makes Russell's philosophy so relevant today, especially in the age of the internet.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. Social media, fake news, all that jazz.
Exactly. We're constantly bombarded with information, much of it coming from sources we don't personally know or trust. And yet, we're expected to sort through it all to figure out what's true, what's biased, what's just plain made up.
It's like that whole knowledge by description thing just exploded. We're surrounded by descriptions, interpretations, opinions. It's enough to make your head spin.
And this is where Russell's ideas about critical thinking become so important. He reminds us that we can't just passively accept everything we read or hear. We have to be active participants in constructing our own understanding of the world.
We've got to channel our inner detectives, constantly questioning, evaluating evidence, and being willing to update our beliefs when new information comes along.
Precisely. And that's a skill that goes far beyond just philosophy. It's essential for navigating everyday life in our increasingly complex world.
Okay, so we've talked about how our senses can be unreliable and how we rely on knowledge by description more often than we realize. But I get the feeling Russell wasn't done blowing our minds just yet.
Not even close. He had a lot more to say about the nature of reality, and this is where things get really metaphysical.
No, boy, here we go. Hit me with it. What other philosophical curveballs did Russell have up his sleeve?
We're about to enter the realm of universals. Get ready for a brain workout, because this is where Russell really challenges us to think differently about the very fabric of existence.
Our universals. It's already sounding intimidating. Spill the tea. What did Russell mean by this?
Well, think of it like this. What do a red apple, a red fire truck, and a red sunset all have in common?
They're all red. Pretty obvious, I'd say.
Exactly. But here's the thing, that redness, that quality they share, is not something you can physically touch or see on its own. It's a concept, an abstract idea.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. It's like redness exists beyond any one specific object. It's like a universal truth of redness.
That's the gist of it. Russell called these shared concepts universals. He believed they exist independently of our minds, kind of like a blueprint for reality.
So redness is out there, doing its thing, whether we're here to perceive it or not. That's a wild thought.
And it's not just colors, it applies to all sorts of things. Think about shapes like triangleness. You just know a triangle has three sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not something you learn through experience. It just makes sense.
Yeah, it's like it's hardwired into our brains. Like you can't have a triangle with four sides. That's just breaking the rules.
Right. And Russell believed that these innate understandings we have, these core concepts, are a glimpse into the realm of universals.
So our brains come preloaded with this universal software that helps us make sense of the world. But even our software can have glitches, right?
Good point. And Russell acknowledged that our understanding of these universals can evolve. What was considered a universal truth in one era might get challenged and revised as our knowledge grows.
Which brings us back to the whole knowledge by description thing. We might think we're grasping a universal truth, but it could just be our limited understanding based on the information we have at the time.
Exactly. It's a good reminder to stay humble, stay curious, and always be open to new information and perspectives.
Because who knows, that universal truth you cling to today might just be tomorrow's outdated software.
Love that analogy. But even if our understanding of these universals is always evolving, Russell's ideas still offer a really compelling way to think about the nature of reality and the limits of our own knowledge.
It's definitely given me a lot to chew on. So to wrap things up, what's the key takeaway for our listeners? What do you hope they walk away with after this deep dive into Bertrand Russell's brain?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. Don't be afraid to question everything. Question your senses, question your sources, even question those deeply held beliefs you think are unshakable.
Because questioning is how we learn, how we grow, and how we avoid falling into those comfortable but potentially misleading boxes.
Exactly. Embrace that curiosity, that skepticism, is what makes us human. And it's what drives us to seek a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the fascinating and often mind-bending world of Bertrand Russell. We hope you've enjoyed the ride.
And who knows, maybe it sparks some philosophical ponderings of your own.
If so, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Join the conversation on our social media channels, share your insights, and keep those philosophical fires burning. Until next time, happy pondering.